Niccolo Machiavelli wrote the most celebrated manual on power in human history. He advised princes. He studied generals. He mapped the invisible architecture of how the world actually works. And then he went home and repeatedly failed to follow a single word of it. There is a letter written by Machiavelli himself to a close friend, in which he describes in almost painful detail an encounter at a roadside inn with a woman he knew he should have walked away from. He did not walk away. He stayed. He was taken advantage of. He was embarrassed. He knew it was coming, and he did it anyway. This was not a rare moment of weakness for Machiavelli. It was a pattern. A man who understood power more clearly than almost anyone who ever lived was consistently undone by the same force he saw destroy men around him his entire life. Desire. Not just physical desire. The deeper desire to be wanted, to be chosen, to feel in the presence of someone else's attention that you are enough. And what Machiavelli observed both in himself and in the hundreds of men he watched across decades of political life was this: desire, unchecked, is the single most reliable destroyer of male power. Not enemies, not circumstance, not bad luck. The inability to govern what lives inside themselves. In this video, I am going to show you exactly what Machiavelli learned from his own contradictions and from the men he watched fall because of theirs. Not to make you feel judged, to make you see clearly what most men never do until it is too late. To understand what Machiavelli taught about this particular weakness, you first need to understand the contradiction at the heart of the man himself. He wrote about self-mastery with more precision than anyone before him. He understood that the prince who is governed by his passions rather than his reason is a prince who will eventually be destroyed by those passions. He wrote it, he believed it, and he spent significant portions of his own life failing to live by it. His letters reveal a man who visited the brothels of Florence regularly. Biographers and historians who studied his correspondence noted the pattern ran across years and hundreds of encounters that he described himself with a frankness that is almost startling for a man of his standing, who fell into entanglements he knew were foolish, who described his own behavior with a kind of rueful self-awareness that makes you wonder whether the philosophy he built was partly a response to the weaknesses he could not conquer in himself. And here is what makes this important. Not the salacious details, not the hypocrisy, the insight it produced. Because Machiavelli's personal failures gave him something that purely theoretical thinkers never have: first-hand knowledge of exactly how the mechanism works from the inside. He did not just observe men being weakened by desire and the need for approval. He was one of those men. And that experience made what he wrote about it uncomfortably precise. From his writing and from the patterns he observed in men across every level of society, Machiavelli pointed toward 4 specific weaknesses that make men predictable, that make them easy to lead, easy to manipulate, easy to contain by anyone who understands these patterns and is willing to use them. Weakness 1. The need to feel powerful in the presence of someone who makes them feel chosen. Machiavelli observed that men in power often make their worst decisions not in moments of adversity, but in moments of flattery. When someone treats them as exceptional, when someone signals that they alone have been selected above all others for attention, admiration, desire. In that moment, the judgment that had been sharp, the caution that had been reliable, softens. Not completely, not obviously, just enough for the wrong decision to feel like the right one. Machiavelli wrote that the prince must be especially careful around flatterers. He understood that flattery directed at vanity is not primarily about making someone feel good. It is about lowering their guard precisely far enough to create an opening. The man who needs to feel chosen will always be vulnerable to the person who knows how to make him feel that way. Weakness. 2. The compulsion to perform strength rather than possess it. This one is subtle, and it is one of the most damaging of all four. The man who is genuinely secure does not need to demonstrate his security. He does not need to prove his status. He does not need to be seen making the bold choice, taking the unnecessary risk, spending the money he cannot afford, saying the thing that sounds impressive rather than the thing that is true. But the man who is performing strength rather than possessing it is driven by a completely different engine. He is driven by fear. Fear that if he does not perform at every available moment, someone will see what is underneath. And what Machiavelli observed was that this performance made men almost perfectly predictable. Because if you know a man is performing, you know exactly what he needs you to see. And the moment you provide that, you have him. Weakness. 3. The inability to tolerate emotional discomfort without seeking immediate relief. Machiavelli was precise about this. He understood that the most dangerous moments for any decision-maker were not the moments of crisis. They were the moments of tension that hadn't yet resolved. The quiet anxiety, the low, persistent discomfort, the feeling of something unresolved that sits in the background of every other thing you are trying to do. In those moments, men consistently reach for whatever makes the feeling stop, not whatever solves the problem, whatever makes the feeling stop. And that distinction, that gap between solving and numbing, is where more bad decisions are made than in any other single place. The man who cannot sit with discomfort is the man who can be offered relief at the exact moment it costs him most, and he will accept it because the discomfort has become louder than the cost. Weakness. 4. Confusing conquest with worth. This is the deepest one, and the most honest thing Machiavelli's own life reveals about himself and about the men around him. There is a category of man who measures his value not by what he builds, not by what he understands, not by the depth of his character or the quality of his judgment, but by whether he is desired, whether he is wanted, whether someone is choosing him above everyone else. And for that man, every conquest provides a temporary answer to a permanent question. Am I enough? Machiavelli watched men at the height of their power make decisions that defied every rational explanation because of this question. Decisions that cost them alliances, decisions that destroyed reputations, decisions that handed their enemies exactly the opening they needed, all in pursuit of an answer that conquest could never actually give them. Because the answer to "Am I enough?" cannot come from outside. It never could. And the man who keeps looking for it there is the man who never runs out of vulnerability. Here is where this becomes something more than a catalog of male failure. Machiavelli was not writing to mock the men who fell into these patterns. He was not writing to judge himself. He was writing because he understood that these 4 weaknesses are not character flaws in the moral sense. They are structural vulnerabilities, built into the architecture of what it means to be human, built into the deep need for connection, the need for validation, the need to feel that your existence matters to someone in a way that is visceral and real. Machiavelli did not believe these needs were wrong. He believed that a man who had not examined them was a man who could be controlled through them. And a man who had examined them, who had sat with the uncomfortable reality of his own particular version of this hunger and understood it, was the man who could not be easily led by it. This is the Machiavellian move applied to the interior world, not suppressing the desire, not pretending the need does not exist, seeing it clearly, naming it without shame, understanding exactly how it operates and exactly what it will cost when it is operating without your awareness. Because the desire you cannot see controls you completely. The desire you can see is simply information. Information about what you need. Information about where you are most vulnerable. Information that allows you to make a conscious choice rather than a driven one. Let me bring this directly into your life, because the historical context is interesting, but the reason you are still watching is because something in this is not just about Machiavelli. Every man has a version of these 4 weaknesses, a specific way that the need to feel chosen distorts his judgment, a specific way that the compulsion to perform overrides the more honest choice, a specific emotional discomfort that he reliably reaches for something to numb rather than sitting with until it resolves, a specific question about his own worth that he has been trying to answer in the wrong places for longer than he wants to admit. You already know which one is yours, not as an abstract concept, not as something that applies to other men. The specific situation, the specific person, the specific pull that has cost you something real in a moment when you knew better and did it anyway. Machiavelli knew better too. That is not the point. The point is what you do with the knowing. The man who knows his weakness and continues to be surprised by it has not actually done the work of knowing. The man who knows his weakness and has mapped it and understands the specific conditions under which it becomes loudest and has built something inside himself that can hold in those conditions, that man is genuinely harder to move. Not invulnerable, harder to move. And in a world that consistently attempts to find your lever and pull it harder to move, is the most important thing you can become. Machiavelli wrote The Prince and Discourses on Livy and the Art of War, books that have shaped political thought for 5 centuries. He also wrote letters to his friends, describing his own foolishness with a self-awareness so clear it reads more like a confession than a correspondence. Both of those things are true. The brilliance and the blindness, the philosophy and the contradiction, the map of human weakness drawn in part by a man who knew the territory from the inside. And what that tells us is something I think most men need to hear. Understanding your weakness does not make you immune to it. It never fully does. But it changes the relationship you have with it. From something that operates in the dark, pulling you in directions you only recognize after the damage is done, to something you can see coming. Something you can name. Something you can choose consciously rather than follow blindly. The 4 weaknesses, the need to feel chosen, the compulsion to perform, the flight from discomfort, the search for worth in conquest, are not shameful. They are human. Deeply, specifically, honestly human. The shame, if there is any shame at all, is not in having them. It is in never looking at them, never naming them, never doing the uncomfortable work of understanding where they came from and what they actually cost. Machiavelli looked, perhaps not consistently enough to change his own life as completely as his philosophy demanded, but he looked, and what he saw,
he wrote down with enough precision that 500 years later, it is still pointing directly at something in you. Now it is your turn to look, not at him, at yourself. With the same honesty he brought to the most uncomfortable truths about power and human nature, starting with the one closest to home. If this video reached something in you, if it named something you have been aware of but never quite looked at directly, then do 3 things. First, take one honest minute and identify which of the 4 weaknesses you recognize most in yourself. Not which one is most comfortable to admit, which one is most true. That recognition is the beginning of the only work that matters. Second, hit the like button. Not for me, because there is a man somewhere who needs to see this at exactly the right moment, and the algorithm surfaces what people value. If this was worth your attention, help it find him. And third, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of conversation. The kind that does not flatter you, the kind that does not tell you what you want to hear, the kind that points at the thing you have been looking past and asks you to finally look at it. The person who turns on the bell, who shows up before the crowd,
is already demonstrating that they do not wait to be moved by something external. They are moving deliberately. That is exactly the shift this entire video was pointing toward.